What is up, everyone? I am TST's the Mudman, and it's time to figure out what we are going to play this weekend ranked in Gods Unchained. So first off, over in the PTR realm, we've got some big news. A huge proposed balance change is being tested. Lots of buffs, lots of nerfs, lots of huge changes bound to shake up the meta. It is definitely going to be a hoot and a holler. But that is in the PTR realm, so presumably that big meta shakeup comes next week. And this week we have the same old meta we've become accustomed to for the past month. One cool thing of note is, as you can see, we are here on gudex.com looking at God popularity over the past 7 days. And as you can see, Nature, Death, and Deception are all essentially the exact same amount of popularity. Magic with a slight 1% drop off, then again 1% drop off to War, then Light far less popular than the others. But all in all, the God diversity at Mythic rank is very diverse at the moment, so should be very fun and variable games this weekend. But when you run into Nature over your weekend ranked event, it's probably going to be an aggressive Nature deck with some sort of wild synergy. Death is a toss-up between zombies and Nubians. Zombies have started to overtake Nubians in popularity, and in this balance patch that's coming out presumably next week, the Nubians are getting nerfed a lot. So a lot of players might be, getting rid of their Nubian cards and playing zombie this week. Or, conversely, a lot of people might be playing Nubians because it's the last chance they have to play Nubians at their strongest point. But in my opinion, zombie death is probably going to be the most popular death archetype this weekend. Deception's most popular archetype is definitely Aggro Deception or Hidden Rush Deception. Lots of hidden creatures, lots of attack buff cards, big damage very quickly. Magic can be any archetype. It can be control, it can be combo, it can be aggro, but the most common Magic archetype is definitely control Magic. It's one of the most popular archetypes in the ladder in general, so you're bound to see a couple of strong control Magic decks this weekend. War can either be Relic War or like creature tempo-based war. Creature-based war decks have been growing in popularity a whole lot, but just like Anubians, the Relic War decks are being nerfed pretty substantially in the next balance patch, so you might see a lot of people, getting all the Relic War out of their system. And then we have the least popular god in Light. The strongest Light archetype is definitely Control Light. It's proven since its inception that it's very powerful. However, a lot of great players have been performing very well on the ladder this past week with Aggro Light. So we do have a strong Aggro Light to show off this week. And now that that's all been said, let's check out some deck lists you might want to play this weekend. Alright, let's start things off with Nature. This is an aggressive tempo Nature list made by Mighty Uncle, and as you can see, it's quite reminiscent to the very powerful aggressive Nature decks we were used to a few balance patches ago when Penumbra Howler and Sing Song Satyr buffed the board. Those cards obviously are no longer AoE buffs, so Mighty Uncle has taken those cards out. It still has Penumbra Howler, it's just now a value generator, but without those AoE buffs, Mighty Uncle has put in some Blitz creatures to recapture tempo. This Nature deck features 2 copies of Paradise Warrior, which, destroys one of your opponent's creatures, as well as buffs one of your own for some more damage. We also have 2 copies of Vicious Manticore, which also has a Blitz and Overkill, so it's very good at, removing your opponent's side of the board. It's also important to note that this deck has 2 copies of Underrush Boar, as well as 2 copies of Canopy Barrage, a single copy of Lightning Strike, and of course 2 Wildfires, which means it's very good at dealing with Aggro Deception's hidden creatures, and Aggro Deception is always popular over the weekend. So if you're a fan of Nature, I think a list like this will do very well. Alright, next up we have Anubian Death. This list was made by 3 question marks. This was the best performing Anubian Death deck over the past weekend ranked event. I think this is the exact same list we featured last week as well. I'm not going to go over Anubian Death again, everyone knows how it works, but the deck code will be in the description if you want a strong death deck to play. So now let's move on to Aggro Deception. This list was made by Squid, and it is a fairly normal Aggro Deception list. There are a few things I'd like to talk about, mainly in the 5 mana slot. Pretty much every Aggro Deception deck runs between 2 and 4 5-mana creatures. Sneaky Bruiser is always included, and then the next slot is usually filled with either Reflection Elementalist or Guild Enforcer. Guild Enforcer is obviously very strong. It's a guild creature that can be buffed by your Selfless Guildmate. It synergizes naturally with your Orpheos Distraction God Power because of its armor, but most importantly, it's very strong against Relic War. However, I'm featuring Squid's deck because I prefer the Reflection Elementalist over the Guild Enforcer this week. Guild Enforcer definitely has a lot of great qualities. However, it's most important in that Relic War matchup, and because of Aggro Deception's inherent speed, it's a pretty decent matchup for Aggro Deception anyway. but Aggro Deception is very weak to control magic, and Reflection Elementalist is great in that matchup. It's the perfect card to play right before you think your opponent's going to like shape blast you. It makes it so your board goes from very easy to clear to very resilient, and then you can of course start hiding your Reflection Elementalist creatures and buffing them and continuing to go face. The only other thing of note in this deck is we have a single copy of Assassin's Aim and a single copy of Lethargy Mage. Lethargy Mage is not very common in these Aggressive Deception decks. However, it is a neat inclusion. It's obviously very strong against opposing Switch Duelists, just destroys them. It's also very powerful after your Lady Marcella dies, so, a pretty decent inclusion altogether. But, we've seen time and time again, Aggro Deception is very powerful. This list here uses Reflection Elementalist to increase one of its worst matchups. So if you like Aggro Deception, I think a list like Squids could be a great choice for this weekend ranked event. Alright, now we have Control Magic. This list was made by J14. And this is a fairly standard Control Magic list. There are a couple of strange inclusions. The first one I want to go over is one that I really like in Wall of Lightning. Just a strong frontline creature to get in the way of your Relic War opponents or any, creature-based deck opponents. So good against nature, good against aggressive light, obviously great against war. And then, of course, if it sticks around, it does have that spell boost, which you can pair with your many, many AoE cards. We have 2 copies of Unannounced Arrival, obviously 2 copies of Shape Blast, 2 Stormtresses, which doesn't get affected by spell boost, but is still AoE. Unbound Flames, and then a single copy of Magnetic Blast. Another thing I find very interesting in this deck is there are no copies of Tracking Bolt, which is very strange to me. Tracking Bolt seems like pretty premium removal, decent single target removal for its mana, and flexible AoE that you can easily pair with Spell Boost. That being said, there's no Street Conjurers or Academy Apprentices in this deck, so the only Spell Boost is the aforementioned Wall of Lightning. We do, of course, have that aforementioned Magnetic Blast, which is definitely stronger than Tracking Bolt when targeting like an Armor Lurker or a Guild Enforcer, but it seems strange to me to have no Tracking Bolts in the deck at all. But besides that, we have our normal Control Magic finishers, big, high mana cost cards with Helmna, with City Planner, with Eric the Dragon. Of course, you have more mag for the big like AoE board clears, and then you have the burn finishers with your Flame of the Second Shattering. And you can't talk about Control Magic without at least mentioning Crystal Tech Scholar. It's what really puts the whole deck together. It's what allows you to run all of these high mana cards. It's like 2 manas worth of, or 2 manas locks worth of mana for just 1 card, and maybe even some card drop. Very strong. Echo cards also synergize nicely with your dragons. Another interesting card of note is we have Manosian Infiltrator, which is obviously good against Pyramid Wardens, as the card art would suggest. It's also very good against something like zombies. It makes it so you can just ping away a Cursed Obelisk after Manosian infiltrating it. This deck is also extremely well teched against Anubians, which is a very bad matchup for Control Magic generally. We have a single copy of... Oh, actually, there is no copy of Palace's Incantation. I take that back. But we do have a copy of Gleamweaver to get rid of, those key Anubians. We also have Iron Tooth Goblin to destroy any Necrosceptors or Skull Scepters or just War Relics. All in all, a very powerful Control Magic list, so if you like those grindy Control Magic games, this could be a good list for the weekend. Alright, now let's talk War. This is the Tempo War list made by Fungal, and this list is fairly similar to the Tempo War list we showed off last week with a few major differences. The first thing is this deck has a few more Vikings, as well as a little more Viking synergy cards with the Battle Bard to buff one of those powerful creatures +2 attack. This deck also has removed the Enduring Shields and instead put in Hearts of Bronze, which is a very powerful spell. It gives all of your creatures +1 armor, which makes it so your creatures are harder to remove, so they're easily buffed subsequently by cards like Another Round. It also pairs extremely nicely with Overproof Brew, making it so your creatures take no damage, they only get the +2 attack and protected, and of course you do deal 1 damage to each of your opponent's creatures. And anyone who's ever experienced a Protected Benediction knows that creatures with protected and armor are not fair, and you want to be doing the unfair things, because that's how you win in card games. Another key difference between this deck and last week's deck is the curve is much lower. There are no Sneaky Bruisers or Soul Survivors. In lieu of that, we have some more tech cards. We have Relic Removal, just destroy any relic regardless of size. We also have some relic buff cards in Warmonger Smith and some more early game tempo creatures in Master Tactician. But essentially, this deck is really good at building a strong, resilient board state, buffing it up, and doing big damage. So if you like War and if you like creature-based decks, then this could be a great list for this weekend ranked event. Alright, and the last god to go over is Light. This is a Zoo Light list made by Party Boy Craig. And I'm a big fan of Party Boy Craig as a deck builder. His lists are always built for consistency. He always has a set strategy, and then his cards don't deviate. This light list is a great example of that. The theme is creatures that buff other creatures. So let's just scroll through the list and look at all of the cards that do that. We have Humble Benefactor, which of course has Echo, so it's 2 creatures in 1, and buffs a creature's health. We have 2 copies of Fellow Janissary, which buff a creature +1/+1. We have 2 copies of Intimidating Uplifter, which buffs a creature +1/+2. We have 2 copies of Excitable Evangelist, which is like a Humble Benefactor, an Echo creature, which buffs a creature +1/+1. Lysander Spear is not a creature, but it does buff a creature, presumably every single turn +2/+2. Militant Theist, another creature that buffs a creature +1/+1. It also destroys things like Armor Lurkers, opposing Vespers, opposing the other 1-mana 1/1 protected creature that Light has. Shadow Scryers, the list goes on. Militant Theist buffs creatures, also kills creatures. Thester gets buffed by all of these creatures coming into play. Cern is just good. And then let's look at all of the other cards in the deck. We have Olympian Guard, who, if left to his own devices, will buff himself. We have Radiant Dawn, which buffs the entire board. Changing of the Gods, which buffs the entire board. Cern, just good. Canonize, just amazing single target buff card. And then, of course, we have Asterius, which buffs the entire board +2/+2. So this deck is just really good at building a board, building up one or multiple creatures, while building up a large board state to subsequently buff later with something like that Radiant Dawn or Asterius. This deck also runs a single copy of Roadside Checkpoint, which is a strange inclusion. It's a 7-mana AoE buff that gives your creatures +2/+2 and frontline. In a pinch, you could just play it for 2 mana to get 2 1/1s if you really needed to. We also have 2 copies of Pyramid Warden, just an excellent creature to play in the early game and then buff with all of those aforementioned creature buff creatures. And 2 copies of Card Shark, which might seem strange at first, but when you look at the creature buff spells we have in the deck, Radiant Dawn obviously pairs excellently with Card Shark on turn 4. Changing of the Gods, also great with Card Shark. Zoo Light, or like Zoo decks in general, tend to do a lot of strong plays on turn 5. This is a very powerful turn 5 play with Changing of the Gods and Card Shark. Yeah, but essentially this is a strong Zoo Light list if you want to play a creature-oriented deck and you don't want a brick. This deck seems incredibly consistent. Then a Zoo Light list like this could be great for your weekend run. But now let's also talk about Control Light a bit, because Control Light is the strongest of the light archetypes. This list is very similar to the Control Light list we've talked about in the past. I'm not really going to go over it. Just like the Anubian Death deck, we've talked about Control Light a million times, but the deck list will, of course, be in the description if you want a strong Control Light list to play. But that is it for all the lists you might want to see. Let's jump into the conclusion. Alright, so it is conclusion time. We talked about the stuff, we thought about the stuff. What should we play this weekend ranked in Gods Unchained? Well, the boring answer is probably Aggro Deception. It's extremely strong. It's been good every single week. But if you want to go against the grain, the punk rock pick, if you will, you could go with some Zoo Light, least popular god, really stick it to the man. I don't know. I'm really excited for next week's balance patch. Whatever you go with, try to have fun. Tell us how you did in the TST Discord, and have a wonderful day. Hey, you! Did you know that subscribing to the TST YouTube channel will increase your win rate by 6.9%? So what are you waiting for? Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell for notifications. And while you're at it, equip Scythe of the Harvest and attack the like button directly in the face. Bye-bye!